Hi, it's Laura Teen. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. In this video, I have a tarot book review to share with you that I'm very excited about. What I hope is one of many tarot related book reviews that I plan to be sharing in 2024. Happy to be starting off with this book, Tarot for Transformation 2, Pentacles, A Journey of Healing and Self-Growth Through the Minor Arcana by Dreya Blume. So I will timestamp my review below as best I can. I plan to begin by introducing the book and the series that the book is a part of, discussing the book's structure and layout, talking a little bit about Dreya's approach to tarot in this book, giving an example of the kinds of content that you can expect to find in this book by discussing one particular card. I want to talk a little bit about how I'm approaching working my way through this book series. I think that this is a book and by extension series that you could work through in a number of different ways, but I thought, sharing how I've worked through is probably of interest and relevant, certainly relevant to my thoughts about the book. And then I'll just give some final thoughts. So, Tarot for Transformation 2, Pentacles, as you can probably guess from its title, is a part of a series. It has a number 2 in it. So this book is preceded by a book on the major arcana, which I have. Thank you, Dreya, for sending it to me, but I have not yet read. And that is, of course, Tarot for Transformation. Very large book. So I'm starting with the minors. And the series Tarot for Transformation is going to include a book on each of the minor arcana suits. I will mention before I dig into the details on the Pentacles book that the Swords book is now available. This one was just published quite recently, and Dreya was kind enough to send me a copy. I will be reviewing this once I have worked my way through it. The Pentacles, though, was first released in early 2023. I picked this up on Amazon. They're self-published on Amazon. I got this in about October and worked my way through over the course of about 6 weeks. It took me to go through this book. Now, I actually went through this book. Dreya expanded from the initial version of the Pentacles by about 100 pages. So I worked through the earlier version, which is shorter, then received the lengthened version, went through the two side by side, identified the differences, which I'm not going to elaborate here because if you decide to acquire this book, you'll be getting the longer one. But went through to ensure that I had engaged with all of the content effectively and, was familiarized with the additions sufficiently to be able to give, what I think is a good review reflexive of my thoughts of the version of the book that is currently available. So that is my journey so far with Tarot for Transformations. And I'm really excited about this book. So, the structure of the book. Something that you will notice right away when you look at this book, that I noticed right away, and I will admit I had some thoughts about, is that there are no page numbers. There are no page numbers in the book at all. There is also no table of contents. Now, in the experience of working through the book, this does not bother me in the slightest. I do like tracking my reading statistics on Storygraph, so I did kind of count the pages as I was going to say how much I had read in any given day. But, I've used Post-its to be able to find my place for this review because there are no page numbers. Now, I really don't think a book like this needs a table of contents. It is structured with some introductory sections, which I'm going to go over in detail, and then it proceeds card by card from the King of Pentacles down to the Ace of Pentacles. So it's very easy to navigate and easily flip through to find, the particular card that you might be looking for. But I thought that was interesting. I'm assuming that no page numbers is maybe something to do with kind of ease of formatting for ebooks, you know, to be able to resize the text and things like that. So that would be my guess. Anyway, the book starts with a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is just a brief statement about the book, you know, not being an instance of the author offering medical or psychological kinds of advice. And given that Dreya is a psychotherapist, you know, that disclaimer is probably particularly important. It includes a list of books also written by Dreya Blume, and she's written a number of books, not all of which are about tarot, but several of which are, that will be familiar to folks. There is a brief about the author section about Dreya, noting that she's a psychotherapist, workshop leader, group facilitator, educator, and coach who has been working with tarot cards since 2004 and can't imagine a life without them. And it shares a little bit about the different places that she's lived and worked and her website. The book is dedicated to Pamela Coleman Smith. We have a quote from Eliphas Levi: "An imprisoned person with no other book than the tarot, if he or she knew how to use it, could in a few years acquire universal knowledge and would be able to speak on all subjects with unequaled learning and inexhaustible eloquence." And there's a few more quotes to open the book. And then we have a section called Please Read. And I will note that this Please Read section also appears verbatim in the Swords book at the introduction. And I think it's, you know, it's good that it does, and I'm sure it will appear in all of them. And the Please Read is really kind of introducing the book and also inviting the reader to take care of themselves, right? It notes that the book is journal-based and full of reflection prompts, and therefore, quote, "your progress along this journey is directly based upon your doing the work, really doing the work, no excuses," which means not just reading through this book, but actually carving out the time to sit down and write. It doesn't matter how much, just that you write something, end quote. And so the section recommends getting a notebook, any kind of notebook will do, to have to work through the journaling prompts, and also offers a word of caution, noting that some of the content may bring up, you know, strong feelings, and to be kind for your, you know, be kind to yourself, be careful with yourself, you know, and a note that Dreya believes in therapy and feels that it could be an awesome adjunct to the work you do with this book, but that is up to you, right? But recommends a kind of support system to have in place. And I think this is good because I will say, you know, and I'll talk a little bit more about my own experiences working through this book. The journaling questions in here are intense, some of them, and I say that in the best possible way. Plenty of tarot books have journaling prompts. You know, this is something that we're all going to be familiar with as tarot enthusiasts. There are some questions here that I don't know that I had ever really sat down and asked myself in as explicit of terms as are asked in this book. I really appreciated that about this book. It is, though, one that could, you know, affect a reader in difficult ways given some of the content. So that Please Read, you know, is I think an important inclusion, and having that at the beginning of the book made me feel like I was in good hands with this, like right from the beginning. Like the author has thought about the impact that her work is going to have on, you know, a diverse readership, I would say, and that to me is responsible, and a good thing. I felt good reading that Please Read section. I appreciated it as a reader. Now, there is also then an introduction, and this introduction, again, not exactly the same terms, because the introduction does touch on, of course, the Pentacles, but some of the introduction section also is included in the Swords and presumably will be in all of the books. And this is a section introducing the author's approach to the Smith-Waite specifically, and to kind of tarot more broadly in these books. From that introduction, it goes straight into the King of Pentacles, and each section for each card starts with a large black and white image. The book is black and white grayscale throughout. So it starts with an image of that particular card and then goes along for numerous pages until you know you're in the next section, because you see, of course, the Queen of Pentacles from there, right? And it goes and ends with the Ace. There are a couple of quotations at the end, and that's it. So that is the structure and layout of the book. I will note now again, something that the book does not have, since it goes straight from the Ace and a few quotes to the end. The book does not have a bibliography. I do wish that the book had a bibliography, in that Dreya really covers a lot of ground in this book. She goes to history, to philosophy, to mythology, to religious studies, to any number of other areas, which she skillfully connects to the tarot. And, were there a bibliography, it would be easier to follow up on some of the specifics, right? That said, I will say, if you watch my book reviews, if there's no bibliography, I'm going to say something about it. And if there's a crappy bibliography, I'm also going to say something about it. A bibliography is just important to me as a reader. But I will say, some of the time when I complain about a bibliography being missing from a book, or not being present in a book, sometimes that complaint is rooted in me thinking that the author doesn't know what they're talking about. And that is not the case with this book. The fact that there is not a bibliography here does not make me remotely suspicious that Dreya doesn't know what she's talking about. I have a background in philosophy. I have a doctorate in cultural studies. I have, studied philosophy in academic context and taught it as well, at the university level for quite a long time. And her discussions of different philosophers' work, one of which I'll talk about in reference to giving an example of a card entry. Her discussion of a philosopher's work as she discusses it is accurate, right? And makes complete and total sense. And from what I can tell, this is true of all of the information in this book. I did ask a couple of different friends to take a peek at different sections of this book, just short quotes or kind of like a single page, to say, hey, I don't necessarily know a ton about this area, but I know you do. Can you please read this little bit and tell me what you think of the content? And in every instance, the reaction was positive, right? In every single instance, the reaction was positive. So I really feel like the book is well researched. I feel like it is well informed, and it comes from an informed place. I yearn for bibliography, but there it is. I will say, while there is no bibliography, there are a lot of quotations, and they are attributed very clearly, right? So again, in talking about a bibliography, in no way am I suggesting things are like not original or not attributed clearly, because they are. The authors that Dreya cites are cited very clearly and directly, so that's great as well. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of references in this book, which I think is fantastic. Now, moving on to Dreya's approach to tarot, which I think is always worth talking about, because how an author approaches, the subject matter is going to inform a lot of how you're going to react to a book, right? Or how I'm going to react to a book, how we feel about that approach. The first sentence in the introduction of the book: I love the Waite-Smith Tarot. So this is very much a book that is focused on Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork, right? Not Smith-Waite as a system of tarot or as a tradition of tarot, but Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork very specifically. The book makes a lot of references to very specific symbolism in the deck, makes reference to color symbolism in the deck, patterns on fabric, imagery in the backgrounds, and so on. So it is really important, I think, to get the most as you can out of a book like this, to either have a copy of Pamela Coleman Smith's deck, right? And whether that's the Centennial or the yellow box, like, I think that doesn't really matter so much, but having a copy of that artwork on a deck, or going to learntarot.com, for example, which has good pictures of each of the cards and using that as a reference. Because given how specifically keyed to the Smith-Waite this book is, I don't think that the reader's experience would be the same or that the book would be as effective if you tried to, for example, work through this with like This Might Hurt Tarot or Dreaming Way or any of these kind of decks that are Smith-Waite influenced. This is a book about Smith-Waite Tarot, very much so. So that is an important thing to know. Okay. And I have complicated feelings about the Waite Smith Tarot, actually. So I wasn't sure how I would find, this with Dreya's love of the deck being, really so front and center, but but the love is contagious. So I appreciate it very much. And it comes off the page really strongly, right? When someone really loves what they're talking about or what they're writing about, it you can feel that as a reader, right? Even if Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork is not your thing, right? The appreciation for that artwork that is exuded from this book is, I think, a wonderful thing. Now, in the introduction, Dreya also talks about the ways in which the minor arcana tend to be given kind of less emphasis than the majors, right? Ways in which the majors are positioned as dealing with kind of major archetypal universal kinds of themes versus the minors being in a sense lesser. And Dreya talks about even Arthur Edward Waite talking about them in these terms, right? She quotes Waite, writing that the minor arcana images are not to be regarded as suggestions of higher and extra divinatory symbolism, right? And she notes that she refuses to, take up this attitude that for her all of the cards are equally important. And I'll read a bit of a direct quote here. She writes, "I believe that each of the 78 cards is a single letter of that symbolic alphabet. Every tarot card in its own right has the potential to be a mirror, reflecting back to us reflecting back to us our unconscious intuitive wisdom. In that capacity, all cards were created equal by Pamela Coleman Smith. This means that while I recognize Waite's dismissive attitude toward the minor arcana, I am going to disregard it. My defense? That the author is dead. Not in a literal sense, although that is certainly true, rather in the postmodern meaning as espoused by French philosopher Roland Barthes. According to this idea, when we consume a product, in this case tarot cards, we are engaged in an act of co-creation. This is because regardless of what the original author intended, we bring our own frame of reference and lived experience to that consumption. Whether text or image, we convert what we encounter into something unique to us. Nobody will see or read something the same way. Okay? And so first of all, throwing in Barthes in the beginning of a tarot book is going to hook me as a reader of philosophy. So I appreciate that, in that reference. And this approach of willingness to make the cards one's own, while also writing a book that is very grounded in the symbolism in the original artwork, grounded in historical references in that traditional artwork, grounded in the lines of influence, for example, from earlier decks like the Solabusca to that artwork of Pamela Coleman Smith. Like all of that is there, but through a kind of lens that begins with an acknowledgement that it is in fact a lens, right? An author's perspective is going to be present. And so I really appreciate that about her approach to the cards here. And I appreciate the emphasis on giving the minors their due. And she goes on at the end of the introduction to say, that she always feels sorry for the Pentacles. They come last. The majors get all the love and in-depth analysis, and the minors, can seem like an afterthought. And that this whole project, this series, seeks to kind of challenge that treatment of the minors as an afterthought. And I really love that as a project. So That is the approach taken in this book. Now, from that introduction, we go in again to the card by card, starting with the king. And this is a really, to me, kind of genre defying tarot book, which sounds like a weird thing to say. But it goes a lot of different places. It is not, strictly speaking, a tarot history book, but there are aspects of tarot history in the book. It is not, strictly speaking, a philosophy book or an analysis of the tarot, but it is very strongly an analysis of the tarot, and that is, I think, maybe the predominant kind of approach here, is an analysis of individual cards. It's not just kind of cultural commentary, but it is that as well. So it's doing a lot of different things, right? It's not just a book focused on journaling your way through the deck, but it definitely is that. So it does a lot of things. And that is not me saying that it does too many things. That is me saying that it does a lot of things well. So I want to give a kind of walkthrough here of the King, which is the first card, again, covered as the King of Pentacles. And I'm not going to read the entire entry because it is substantial, but just to go through kind of a general sketch of what you get here, right? To give a sense of what each card receives, I guess, in terms of how they're written about. So we get, of course, the image of the card first, right? And the question, what if the King of Pentacles were the most important card in the tarot deck? What if this one image represented the culmination of your life's journey? What if, as the final card of the final suit, it demonstrated the answer to a critical question? The critical question. It goes on to invite you to open your journal and offers some questions related to, the question, a critical question, life's meaning kind of questions, right? Big questions. From there, Dreya shifts into symbolism present in the cards, starting with the king's crown with a laurel garland, laurel being associated with the Greek god Apollo. And then we get a discussion of why laurel garlands are associated with Apollo and why then they might be included on this card. From Apollo, we shift to Nietzsche, and I was, happy with that reference. I have a Nietzsche shelf back here somewhere. I had an undergraduate course, upper year undergraduate master's split course that was entirely focused on Nietzsche, and all Nietzsche for 4 months. And so when this came, I was enthusiastic. From Apollo, we shifted to Nietzsche, who juxtaposed Apollo with Dionysus, another son of Zeus, who was the god of fertility, wine, pleasure, dance, religious ecstasy, and tragic theater. We see Dionysus connected to the King of Pentacles by the deep red grapes that cover the entirety of his robe. And it continues on to talk about Dionysus and the King of Pentacles and Nietzsche's analysis of Apollo and Dionysus and of Apollonian and Dionysian principles, which again is very well done. When I say I would like the book to have a bibliography, that is because, for example, most readers might not know that Nietzsche's discussion of Apollo and Dionysus is specifically in his text, The Birth of Tragedy. Right? So there's that. Really, really well done and connected to the King of Pentacles in a really effective way. So we talk about Dionysus for a while and Nietzsche's concept of the Apollonian and the Dionysian and their relationship to Greek tragic theater. Back to the King of Pentacles, the king's robe, the background of the king, a comparison between some of the symbolism in the king and the symbolism in the emperor. Their boots are very similar, but the backgrounds are very different, one lush and one dry, and so that is discussed. What is at the king's foot? This is covered next. All throughout, then we get more journal questions on these different themes, right? As the King of Pentacles is unpacked. Notice the heads of bulls at the top of the king's throne. Then there's a discussion of Taurus and Taurus energy and traits associated with Taurus. and Taurus's relationship to this king. Then there's a discussion of the pentagram or the pentacle and its relationship to the senses, its relationship to elements. Right? Dreya writes, regardless of what it might symbolize, the king's casual yet firm balancing of the pentacle on his knee indicates that he is completely comfortable in his power over his suit, something which is similarly illustrated by his foot upon the stone figure. The journey he had begun so long ago is complete. From there, a discussion of the castle in the background with a reference to John Muir. From there, it goes back to the grapes again, briefly, and the wreath that the king has. It goes through more journaling questions inspired by all of these aspects. The King of Pentacles is a person who has seen and done it all. Perhaps it is now time for him to rest. When was the last time you truly rested? The book asks. What recharges your batteries? Consider the word contentment. How would you define that state of being? When have you felt content in the past? How often do you feel content? These are the kinds of questions that the book asks for journaling on. Then some connections are made to Taoism and the way. Some more journal questions. And then the section ends. And each section on each one of the cards ends with, the King of Pentacles has an important message for you. What is it? How specifically will you commit to his counsel? What is something you can do today in order to honor the energy of this card? So substitute King of Pentacles for the other names of the cards, and each one ends with this, right? As something to think about. That is the structure of the King of Pentacles, and each card goes in different kind of meandering directions, but this gives a sense of the kind of content that each card includes. So the way that I approach this, working through this, is that I decided to, take Dreya's suggestion to get a notebook and go for it. So this is why it took me so long. 6 weeks on one book is a while for me. So I bought just a Stalogy plain book. It has a grid, plain notebook, any notebook will do. And I ended up with 40-ish pages of journaling, in my teeny tiny handwriting there. So a lot of writing. And there are a lot of journal questions for each card in here. So what I did to work through is that I would read one card, read through the King of Pentacles. In so doing, with a pencil, I would put an asterisk beside 4 or 5, generally, 4 or 5 questions that I would like to journal on. As well as that final question, the card has an important message for you. What is it? So for that one, I did that one for every single card. Each card I picked 4 or 5 questions plus this, what is the message question. And I wrote just longhand in paragraphs answers to each one. So what I've ended up with is a lengthy set of personal reflections on each card, including my own kind of personal meaning for each card as inspired by this book and inspired by the particular journal questions that I chose. And I think what I'm going to do when I'm done all of this, like done the series, is that I will pull out all of the paragraphs that I wrote in response to the card has a message for you. What is it? Question, and kind of make a little, maybe a zine or something like that, of my personal kind of reflections on the message of each of these cards. I found this a very enriching experience. I really liked working through this. And I feel like it's the kind of thing that you could do again. For example, I could go through and pick out different journaling questions than the one that I chose and end up with a kind of different experience. I can't imagine myself doing all of the journaling questions because there are really just so many of them. But it is a book that I can see myself revisiting for sure, and that I think that I will be revisiting. So that is my approach to this series. I do think you could approach it in a number of different ways, but I approached it choosing a few questions from each card now. final thoughts, sum up of my review, final thoughts. I feel like this book feels like a, you know, couple of hours long conversation with somebody who loves tarot. And I think that that's an amazing thing. This feels like having a conversation, and a good conversation, a good, interesting conversation that goes in different kinds of directions throughout the evening as, different things get brought up in relation to the card that you're talking about. It feels very conversational. It feels very welcoming. It's a very accessible read, I would say, very approachable. It There is a lot of referencing in here. In some places, it feels quite scholarly. You know, if you're going to be talking about Barthes and Nietzsche and, figures like this, there is going to be a kind of scholarly tone to it, but it is very readable and very approachable. Certainly more readable than, for example, reading Nietzsche would be. I really like the connections that have been made here. I feel like this book reads as very inclusive. I don't read this book and get the impression that it was written with a very specific, narrow audience in mind. And yet I also don't feel excluded from it. I think that this can be quite hard to do. This book feels relevant to me. It feels like it was written for a reader like me, but it doesn't feel like it was written for a very, very particular subset of a tarot audience, for example. It doesn't feel like it's written, for instance, only for um, advanced readers. It doesn't feel like it's written only for total beginners. I think that a lot of different readers would get something out of this. It also reads as very inclusive, and I'll just kind of single out the Two of Pentacles for a second in terms of the book reading as inclusive. The Two of Pentacles, a lot of the questions related to the Two of Pentacles, and I'll leave it to you to read the book and learn about the connections and why this is. A lot of the questions in the Two of Pentacles relate to experiences of the body in relation to sexuality, of clothing in relation to gender, of identity in relationship to performance, and bodily experiences of various kinds. And Dreya includes a list of definitions, right, to introduce this section. A little bit into the Two of Pentacles section. She includes a set of definitions for assigned sex, biological sex, gender, gender binary, gender identity, gender expression, cisgender, and so on. And I'm glad that this set of definitions is there. It's well done. They're not always well done. As someone who teaches gender studies, it's not something that I absolutely needed, but I think a lot of readers may. I think it's an important contextualization to have there. It didn't take me out of the reading experience to have a bunch of definitions there. I really like that this section doesn't feel like it's only written for someone of particular identities, right? I think that this is relevant to every reader, actually, the kinds of questions that it asks. And I found some of the questions that it asked quite emotional, actually. And those are, of course, the ones that I chose to engage with. Questions, related to the relationship between my gender and how I feel about my physical body. Um, when was the last time you had to think about your identity and like what was the context of that? How have you benefited from adhering to gendered norms? How have stereotypes helped you? And how have they caused you harm? These kinds of questions, I think, this kind of material, I think, is really important when we're talking about something like the Suit of Pentacles, which is all about, the tangible, the concrete, the physical, sensuous, the body, right? Like these are crucial things, I think, when thinking about what a Suit of Pentacles card can represent in a reading and the areas of life that a Suit of Pentacles covers. I think that this kind of material done badly can be really harmful, but this kind of material done really well, as it is done here, can be extraordinarily affirming and supportive. And I appreciate this book for that. I appreciate this book for that. I think it is not something that happens very often in tarot books, even ones that are framed as being deliberately inclusive don't always feel it as well done as this. And so I appreciate that very much. I will not hesitate to suggest this book on that basis. I also like how flexible this book is. I think that, I found a way of working through this book that worked for me, but I think you could do it a lot of different ways. I wouldn't suggest reading this and not doing any of the journaling. The journaling part is recommended right up front for a reason. To get the most out of this, some amount of journaling or perhaps even meditation on the questions could be an option if writing is not your thing. But certainly some time dedicated to thinking about the questions that are raised in this book is going to enhance your experience. But you could do that a lot of ways. You could take, and I think I'm going to try this, you could take some of the questions in the book and make a spread out of them. You could make an Ace of Pentacles spread and use 5 of the questions from the Ace of Pentacles section, and then shuffle your deck and see what comes up. You could journal all of the questions. It would take you a really long time, but you could. There's a lot of options, I think. And so I think that, depending on how you want to engage with a book like this, it will work for you and it will kind of meet you at the place that you want to engage with it, which I think is rare and good. Now, I don't think there's any inherent reason that you need to read from front to back, king down to ace. I would personally suggest to do it that way because there is kind of a trajectory through the suit, right? There is a trajectory through the cards, but I don't think you have to do it that way. You could jump around based on drawing cards in a reading if you really wanted to. I don't think there's any reason that you would have to start the series with the Pentacles. If for some weird reason the Pentacles don't interest you and you just wanted to go to the Swords, I don't think there's any reason in these books that you couldn't do that. They're being published in the order they're being published, but I don't think that means any of them are prerequisites to any others, right? So, lots of great things about this book. This feels like unlike any other tarot book that I've ever engaged with. I cannot even think of something to compare this to. I can compare sections of it to other things, perhaps. There are definitely some great tarot books out there that involve journaling prompts for each card, for example. And this one does that as well. But it really brings together a lot of different things that tarot books do or tarot books can do in one place that I think makes a really interesting synthesis. Okay. And I feel like while at times I feel a little bit sick of as a kind of, more intermediate or past intermediate tarot reader at this point, I can feel a little bit sick of kind of card by card descriptions as a book structure. This I don't at all. This I really like. I think that this is, intermediate to advanced reader friendly for sure, but also not going to be totally incomprehensible to a beginner. So I think that this book is really well done. I am really happy to have this be the first book that I'm reviewing in 2024 because I feel like I can really enthusiastically recommend this. I really, really enjoy this book. I'm really looking forward to reading the Swords book as well, and eventually, of course, the Cups and the Wands. But for now, that's my thoughts on Tarot for Transformation 2 Pentacles by Dreya Blume. If you've read this book, let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with this book as well. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you again to Dreya for sending me a copy of the longer, new and improved and lengthened version of this book. I'm really excited. So that's the Pentacles. Again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you all a great day, and I will see you again soon. Bye.